The first warning was not a sound, it was a silence. Every sensor on Vera Station stopped reporting at once, not because they were broken, because something had stepped in front of them and the sensors, in their small mechanical way, had decided they did not want to look anymore. Then the docking port on level 9 buckled inward, not from an explosion, from weight, from something pressing against the outer hull with the casual patience of a thing that had never once needed to knock. In the main operations room, a young Tharaki technician named Brell watched every screen on his console go dark one after another, like eyes closing for sleep. He did not run. He sat very still, the way small animals do when they have done the math and found that running will not help. Across the station, in the grand diplomatic chamber where 41 species had gathered for the Conclave's first open summit in 60 years, the news arrived. Not through any official channel, but through the sudden collective inhale of every delegate who had a window. The ship outside was not supposed to be there. It had no running lights. It broadcast no identification signal. It was the color of iron left in fire for too long, dark, encrusted, and enormous, and it moved with the unhurried ease of something that had never once considered the possibility of being told no. Ambassador Sull of the Tharaki delegation rose from his seat. He was a tall being, broad across the shoulder, with a reputation for steadiness under pressure that had taken 30 years to build. He looked at the ship outside the viewport. He sat back down, some part of that 30-year reputation quietly handed in its notice. "Drath," said Commander Voss, head of station security, standing at the chamber door with a data pad in his hand, and no particular hope left in his eyes. "Transponder residue matches the attack on the Yellen fleet, also the Serac colony burn, also the Conclave supply convoy that went missing near the drift 2 years ago." He paused. "There are others I can keep listing." No one asked him to keep listing. The name was known. Every species in that chamber knew it. Children across 40 systems were warned about it, the way children everywhere are warned about things that live in the dark. Drath, last of the Ver kind, a being so old that the Conclave's founding charter contained a footnote about him, not as a citizen, not as a member state, but as a variable, a force to be accounted for the way one accounts for a sun going unstable, not evil exactly, not good either, simply vast and angry and durable in ways that made warships look fragile. 3 fleets had gone to stop him at different points in the last century. None of them had managed it. The 3rd Fleet's commander had, according to recovered logs, spent his final transmission saying that the guns were not doing anything, and that he wanted that on the record. It was on the record. It had not helped. Now Drath was walking through Vera Station like he owned it, which, given that no one had been able to stop him yet, was not entirely an unreasonable way to walk. The corridor feeds showed him moving at a pace that should have been slow, but somehow covered ground too quickly. Delegates who had chosen rooms near the central corridor were now very much regretting that choice. Species that could move fast were moving fast. Species that could not were pressing themselves against walls and trying to become part of the architecture. A section of support beam on level 4 cracked from the vibration of his steps. Just cracked, a small sound in the scale of things, but it was the kind of small sound that reminds a station it is, in the end, just metal and pressure. Seals and hope. In the diplomatic chamber, the organized summit had become an unorganized panic. With better furniture, delegates argued over the emergency channel. 3 species were demanding immediate evacuation. 2 others were demanding that weapons be authorized. One delegate from a species Sull had always found overly optimistic. was suggesting negotiation, and was being ignored in the specific way that sensible suggestions are ignored when everyone is too frightened to be sensible. Sol tried to bring order. He called for quiet. He got partial quiet, which was the best available. We need a representative, he said, someone to make contact, to speak to it before it reaches this chamber and we lose the option of speaking altogether. The silence that followed was very complete. No one stood, no one volunteered. 41 species, some of them with military histories stretching back thousands of years, and not one of them moved. Except one. In the back row of the human delegation's modest seating area, the humans had 3 seats at the conclave, a fact that several older species still found faintly amusing. A man stood up. He was not large. He was not decorated with military honors. He wore the plain gray jacket of a mid-level diplomat envoy and had the sort of face that was easy to forget, which had served him well in rooms where being forgettable was a form of protection. His name was Orin. He was Earth's third-string representative to the conclave, sent because the senior delegates had found reasons to be elsewhere when the posting was announced. He had arrived on Vera Station 6 days ago with 2 cases of luggage, a detailed reading list, and no particular expectation of anything dramatic. "I'll go," he said. Saul looked at him with the expression of someone who wants to say something discouraging but cannot immediately find the right words. "You understand what is in that corridor," Saul said carefully. "I understand what's in the corridor," Orin said. "I also understand that standing in here arguing about it isn't making the corridor any safer." He picked up a small carry bag from under his seat. He checked something inside. It papers from the look of it, actual physical papers, and closed it again. "Someone has to go. I'd rather it be me than no one because no one is what we've been trying so far, and it doesn't seem to be working." He did not wait for Sol to respond. He walked to the chamber door, nodded once to Commander Voss, who stepped aside with the expression of a man watching something he will never be able to explain in a report, and stepped out into the corridor. The door closed behind him. In the chamber, no one spoke. On the sensor feeds, 2 small dots moved through the station, one very large, one very small, and slowly, with the patience of a thing that had long since run out of reasons to hurry, they moved toward each other. Outside, Vera Station drifted in the dark around its dying red star, and did not make a sound. The corridor smelled like heat. Not fire, not burning, just heat, the kind that comes off something very large that has been warm for a very long time. Orin noticed it before he noticed anything else, that dry metallic warmth pressing against his face as he walked, like standing near a furnace that had not been turned off in centuries. He kept walking. The lights in this section of the corridor had given up, not from damage but seemingly from preference. The emergency strips along the floor still glowed faint orange, and in that low light Orin could see the walls. They had bent. Not broken, not cracked, bent very slightly, like the metal had softened just from proximity, and leaned inward in the way that things lean toward heat, without meaning to. He heard Drath before he saw him. It was not a sound exactly. It was more like the feeling of a sound, a low pressure in the chest, a vibration that did not travel through the air but through the floor, through the walls, through the bones of the station and the bones of the man walking toward it, a rhythm, breathing. Orin stopped at the junction of Corridor 7 and the main docking atrium and looked up. Drath was looking at him already. The old records and the Conclave's intelligence files had descriptions of course. Orin had read all of them. He had thought he understood the scale. He found, standing in the atrium and looking up and continuing to look up, that he had not understood it at all. The The files said Drath was large. The files were being modest in the way that people are modest about things that make honest description feel inadequate. Drath was armored in his own skin, dark and ridged and ancient, the color of ore that had been through enough heat to stop caring about it. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and they were fixed on Orin with an expression that was not hostility and not curiosity and not contempt, but something underneath. All of those that had not quite become any of them yet. He was very still. That was the thing Orin noticed most. For something so enormous, he was extraordinarily still. Orin set his bag down on the floor. He straightened his jacket. He looked up at Drath, and the distance between them was perhaps 20 meters, and every sensor on the station was watching, and 40 systems were listening on feeds they were not supposed to have access to, and Orin said, "Have you eaten?" The stillness changed quality. It became a different kind of still, the kind that happens when something very large is so surprised that it briefly forgets what it was about to do. Drath's head tilted. It was a small movement, on something his size small. Movements had weight. "What?" he said. His voice was low and even and had the character of deep stone, not loud but present everywhere at once, filling the atrium the way water fills a container. "Have you eaten?" Orin said again. "Recently, I ask because you've been traveling and I don't know what that's like for your kind, and it seemed like a reasonable thing to check." Another pause. "You are not afraid," Drath said. It was not admiration, it was more like a researcher nodding an anomaly. "I didn't say that," Orin said. "I said, have you eaten?" Something shifted in those pale eyes. Not warmth exactly. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of something unexpected. "You are the delegate," Drath said. "One of them. The others are in the chamber behind 3 locked doors, which I understand and don't blame them for." Orin picked up his bag again and walked 4 steps closer. He stopped when he judged that stopping was the polite thing to do. "My name is Orin. I'm from Earth. We've been in space for about 260 years, so I want to be honest that I don't carry a lot of institutional authority here, but I was the one willing to walk out, so here I am." "Why?" said Drath. "Because someone had to, and because I've read your file, not the threat assessment, the historical record, the real one." Orin paused. "Or as much of it as the Conclave archive still has, which is less than there should be." That landed. Orin could see it land, the way you can see a word arrive in someone's face before they decide what to do with it. "You have read the Verk Accord," Drath said, slowly, like each word was being chosen from a long distance. "All of it," Orin said, "including the annexes, including the parts that were marked restricted in the public record, but were not actually secured properly in the secondary archive, which was an oversight on someone's part and a useful one." He met those pale eyes and held them. "You didn't come here to destroy the station, did you?" A long, long pause, the kind of pause that has age in it. "What makes you say that?" said Drath. "Because if you wanted to destroy it, you would have done it when you docked." Orin said, "You have done it before and you didn't wait then. You're walking through the corridors. You're letting people move out of your way. That's not destruction, that's arrival. You came here to be seen, to make someone pay attention." He tilted his head slightly. "So I'm paying attention. What did you come here to say?" The atrium was silent. Vera Station was silent. 40 systems listening on illegal feeds were silent. Drath looked down at the small human, standing in the orange-lit dark with a carry bag and a straightforward expression and no weapons and no backup, and something in his face shifted in a way that the Conclave's sensors could record but could not name. "The Verk were given a promise," he said, 400 years ago, assigned a chord witnessed by 9 founding species of this conclave. His voice was still even, still low, but something beneath it had changed texture the way iron changes when it is finally under enough pressure to bend. The promise was not kept, and when my people asked, when they sent representatives, when they filed formal objections, when they stood in chambers like this one and spoke, they were delayed, rescheduled, reclassified, buried in procedure, until there were not enough of us left to keep standing in the rooms. He paused. I am the last one standing in the room. Oren was quiet for a moment, not the silence of not knowing what to say, the silence of knowing that what you say next matters, and taking the time to get it right. I know, he said, and I'm sorry, not as a diplomatic form, I mean it as a person. He held the pale gaze. I can't give back what was taken. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't have that kind of authority, and I won't pretend otherwise, but I can listen, and I can make sure that what you tell me goes into the record correctly. He paused. Would that be worth something to you, an honest record? Drath was quiet for a long time. Then he said, come. And he turned and walked back toward the docking bay, and after one breath, Oren picked up his bag and followed. Behind the locked doors of the diplomatic chamber, Ambassador Sol watched the feed in complete silence. Commander Voss stood next to him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. He followed it, Voss said finally. Yes, said Sol. Onto its ship. Yes. Voss looked at the blank feed, where the docking corridor camera had gone dark. What do we do? Sol had no answer for that. He stood there and looked at the dark screen and thought about the Verka chord, which he had never read, and wondered if that had been a mistake. Outside, the burned iron ship sat quiet against the hull of Vera Station, and somewhere inside it, a man from Earth was sitting down across from the most dangerous being in the known galaxy, and asking in all sincerity where he would like to begin. Inside Drath's ship, the air was different. It was warm, the same deep, unrelenting warmth from the corridor, but here it had a character to it, dry and old and still, like a room that had been closed for a long time and remembered what it used to hold. The interior was vast, not decorated, not designed for comfort in any sense that Oren could identify. Just space, high dark open space with walls that curved inward at the top, like the inside of a ribcage, and a floor that was smooth from use rather than from any deliberate polish. Drath settled himself on the far end of the room. Even seated, he occupied the space the way mountains occupy landscapes, not threatening, just present in a way that made everything else secondary. Oren found a raised section of floor near the center that was at approximately the right height to function as a seat if one was human, and not too particular about comfort. He sat on it. He opened his carry bag. He took out papers. Drath watched him do this with the expression of a being who has seen many things across many centuries and has just encountered something genuinely new. You brought physical documents, Drath said. I find screens are easy to dismiss, Oren said, without looking up, sorting the papers into an order that apparently made sense to him. Paper is harder to argue with. People have to physically handle it, makes it real in a way that a data file doesn't always manage. He found the sheet he was looking for and held it up. This is a copy of the original Verka Accord, Article 1. Section 3, the relocation provision. He set it down on the floor between them, facing Drath. There was a pause. Then Drath leaned forward, a slow, careful movement, and looked at it. The paper was very small from where he sat. He looked at it for a long time anyway. Where did you get this? He said. Conclave Secondary Archive. Sublevel records from 411 years ago. It was filed under a bureaucratic category called Resolved Matters, which was creative since the matter was not resolved, but it was a way of making sure it didn't appear in the active record. Oren found another sheet. This is the reparation schedule that was attached to the accord, signed by 9 species. You'll notice the payment dates. He placed it next to the first. And this is the Conclave's own internal budget record from the same period, which shows the funds were reallocated. He paused, not lost, not delayed, moved deliberately into 3 separate infrastructure programs for species, who had more seats on the Conclave floor than the Verk did. Drath was very still. I know this, he said quietly. I have known this for 400 years. I know you know it, Oren said. I'm not showing you this because it's news. I'm showing you this because I want you to understand that I have the same documents you have, that I have read them, that I am not going to sit here and tell you that you are mistaken, or that the record is unclear, or that these things are complicated. He looked up at the pale eyes watching him. They are not complicated. What was done to the Verk was a deliberate choice by beings who calculated that the Verk could not make them pay for it. That is what happened. I am not going to soften it. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. Those had been the silence of tension, of waiting. This one was something else. Something that had been wound tight for a very long time and had just by the smallest degree shifted. The other delegates, Drath said, in that chamber they know. Some of them know some of it. Most of them know enough to know they don't want to look too hard. Oren folded his hands in his lap. Knowledge becomes inconvenient when acting on it is costly. That's not unique to any one species. Humans are not exempt from it. A pause, but I looked, and I found what I found, and here we are. Drath turned his great head slowly, looking at the curved wall of his ship as though he could see through it to the station beyond, to the chamber of delegates who had averted their eyes for 4 centuries. 3 fleets came to stop me, he said. At different times, different commanders, different weapons. He paused. No one sent a delegate. No, Oren agreed. That does appear to have been the gap in the strategy. Another pause. Then something crossed Drath's expression that was not quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. You are an unusual being, he said. People keep saying that, Oren said. I think they mean it as a warning. He reached into the bag again. He drew out a 3rd document. He held it for a moment before he set it down. There is one more thing I found, he said, in the restricted sub-archive. Something that was not in the Verk Accord itself, but was filed with it. He set the paper down. A census report, the Verk population at the time of the Accord, and a second report from 30 years later, after the relocation. He did not say anything else. He let Drath look at the numbers. The warmth in the room seemed to intensify for a moment, and then settle the way the air settles after something has passed through it. 30%, Drath said. His voice had changed. Still low, still even. But underneath the evenness was something that had no armor on it. In 30 years, 30% of my people, from inadequate shelter on a world they had not chosen, from disease, from resource shortage. He stopped. The Conclave had the funds, they had the agreement, they chose not to fulfill it. Yes, Oren said simply. He did not add to it, he did not try to make it smaller or easier to hold. I have kept a list, Drath said after a long time. He turned. At the far end of the ship there was a surface, raised and flat, that Oren had taken for a table or a platform. Drath reached to it and lifted something, a tablet, large, old, made for hands much bigger than human hands. He carried it across the room and set it down in front of Oren. Names, thousands of names, written in the Verk script which Oren could not Read, but the length of the list needed no translation. Every Verk who has died since the displacement, Drath said, I have kept. Count since I was young. When my elders died, I kept their records too. He looked at the list, not at Orin. I did not come to this station to burn it. I came because I wanted someone to look at this list, to know that these were not a population figure in a census. They were people. His voice was even. Absolutely even, in the way that things are even when they have practiced being. Even over a very long time, because the alternative was unbearable. I want someone to know their names were kept, that they were not forgotten. Orin looked at the list for a long time. He did not look away. He did not check the time or shift in his seat or reach for something else. He looked at the names, and he let the weight of them be what they were. Then let the record show, he said quietly, that on this day a representative of the Galactic Conclave sat with Drath, last of the Ver kind, and looked at every name and did not look away. He paused. I'd like your permission to enter this list into the formal record, he said. Not as evidence, not as part of a case, just as what it is, a record of people who lived. Drath did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was so low it was almost below hearing, felt more than heard. Yes, he said. Back on Vera Station, in a room full of beings who had been watching a blank screen for 2 hours and arguing about what to do about it. No one knew what had just happened inside that ship. No sensor could reach it. No camera had an angle. But Brell, the young Tharaki technician who was still at his console, noticed something on his atmospheric reader, a very small shift in the thermal output. From the Verk ship, not an increase, a decrease, as if something inside it had by the smallest possible margin cooled. He noted it in his log. He did not know what it meant. He thought privately that it was probably important, and that he would probably never fully understand why. He was right on both counts. No one on Vera Station slept that night. Not because they were told to stay awake, not because there was an alarm or a protocol. They simply did not sleep the way people do not sleep when something enormous is parked against the hull of the place they are living in. And no one knows yet what it intends to do when morning comes. They sat in their rooms or in the corridors or pressed against viewports watching the dark iron shape of Drath's ship where it rested against the station, and they waited. Commander Voss spent most of the night at his security post, running numbers that did not become any more encouraging as the hours passed. He had reviewed the tactical assessment 3 times. It said the same thing each time. He had stopped reviewing it. Ambassador Saul sat in the diplomatic chamber with 2 aides and a cooling cup of something he had stopped tasting 4 hours ago, and read the Verk Accord. For the first time in his life, not the summary, the actual document, he read it twice. He did not enjoy the experience. Then, at a time when the station's artificial lighting had just shifted to the pale tone it used for early morning, the feed from Corridor 7 flickered back to life. Brell saw it first. He sat up in his chair and looked at the screen, and his hands, which had been still all night, started moving over his console before he had consciously decided to do anything. They're coming back, he said to no one and everyone, both of them. In the diplomatic chamber, the aides woke Saul from a half-sleep he had not intended to fall into, and he stood up too quickly and had to hold the table, and then straightened himself and looked at the feed. Orin was walking first. He looked the same as when he had left, same jacket, same carry bag, same unhurried pace, not unaffected. Orin was not a man who pretended things did not affect him, but composed himself. Behind him Drath walked. And this time something was different. It was difficult to name at first. because it was not a visible difference in Drath's posture or pace or the dark mass of his form moving through the corridor. It was a difference in quality. The first time Drath had walked these corridors, the station had bent around him, the lights had given up, the walls had leaned away. Now he walked as though he was aware of the station, aware of the space he was moving through, of what it held, of what it meant to move through it gently. He was no less immense, no less ancient, but he was walking differently, the way a very large person walks when they have remembered that the room has other people in it. Sul activated the station-wide channel. His voice, when he spoke, was steadier than he expected it to be. All personnel, the atrium now. They came, all of them, in ones and twos and small hesitant groups, because Vera Station's inhabitants were frightened, but they were also, most of them, curious, and curiosity beat fear by a small margin when the alternative was watching a screen alone. They gathered behind the viewports and in the elevated observation ring above the main atrium, and they pressed together, and they were very quiet. Oren walked into the atrium and stopped near the center of the floor. He set his bag down. He turned to face the corridor entrance. Drath entered. The atrium was large enough to hold him without the walls straining. That had been deliberate. Vera Station had been designed for the possibility of large species, though large, in the original design, Notes had not quite anticipated this. He moved to the center of the space and he stopped, and he was still in that absolute way of his, and for a moment the entire station held the particular silence of something about to happen. Drath looked at Oren. Oren looked back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Something passed between them, not words, not a signal, just the look of two beings who had spent the night talking in honest terms about hard things, and had arrived somewhere neither of them had entirely expected to arrive. Then Drath moved. It was slow. Everything he did was slow, because everything he did had mass behind it, and mass takes time to redirect, but there was nothing uncertain in the movement, nothing hesitant. He was doing something deliberate, something he had chosen. He lowered himself to one knee. The sound it made was the sound of a mountain deciding to sit down. The floor of the atrium did not crack. It compressed very slightly under the weight, and the sound traveled through the station's structure and into the feet of every being standing in it, and every being standing in it felt it as something more than sound. In the observation ring above, someone made a small noise and was immediately shushed by everyone around them. Drath's great head was still above Oren's by several meters, even kneeling, but he had lowered himself. That was the fact. The galaxy's oldest living weapon, the thing that had survived 3 fleets and 2 colony scourings and 4 centuries of being the force that the Conclave built threat assessments around, had gone to one knee. He spoke. His voice filled the atrium without being loud. That was one of his qualities, the way his voice found space. Among the Verk, he said, there was a tradition when a warrior met someone who faced them with honesty, not weapons, not politics, not fear. They were acknowledged, not as superior, not as conqueror. He paused, as equal, as something worthy of recognition. His pale eyes rested on Oren. You are the first being in 400 years to come to me without a weapon or an agenda, and speak to me as though my words had weight, as though the names I carry have value. Another pause. They have value. You saw them. You did not look away. He held the position, knee on the ground, head lowered by the small measure that was available to him. This is not surrender, he said. This is acknowledgement. In my tradition it is not a small thing. Oren looked at him for a moment, then he stepped forward. He reached up far, because the geometry was difficult, and placed his hand on Drath's forearm he had to stretch to do it. The armored surface was warm and solid and nothing like any material he had touched before. He left his hand there for just a moment. In my tradition, Oren said, we shake hands, or we put a hand on someone's shoulder to say that we see them. He left his hand where it was. I see you. Drath, last of the Verk, I see all the names you've been carrying. He paused. Let's make sure other people see them too. He took his hand back. He stood straight. Above the atrium in the observation ring, no one had moved. No one had spoken. Commander Voss had his hand on his weapon. He had not drawn it and he was not going to draw it, but he had his hand on it because his hand needed something to do. Saul stood next to Voss. He was looking at the atrium with an expression that was not comfortable, not simple, not easily named. He was looking at Oren and at Drath and at the space between them, and he was thinking about the Verk, a chord which he had read for the first time last night, and about the things he had not read for 400 collective years of conclave history, and about what that had cost. He did it, Voss said very quietly. Without anything, he just talked. Yes, said Saul. The whole galaxy is going to see this footage, Voss said. The illegal feeds were still running. Everyone knew it. Some official channels had quietly picked them up somewhere in the last hour, without admitting that was what they were doing. Yes, said Saul again. He sounded like a being who has just seen a problem he created get solved by someone else, and is trying to decide whether to be grateful or afraid of what comes next. Yes, they are. Down in the atrium, Oren bent down and picked up his carry bag. He checked inside it, the same small practical gesture he had made when he left the chamber the night before. He closed it. He looked up at Drath. I'd like to take you to the formal session, he said, if you're willing. I think it's time the conclave looked at this in a room they can't walk out of. Drath rose. The floor adjusted to the change in weight. He looked down at Oren with those ancient colorless eyes. Will they listen? He said. They'll have to, Oren said. You're very hard to ignore. The nearest thing to a smile that Drath's face was built to make passed across it briefly. He straightened to his full height, which filled the atrium in a way that should have been terrifying and somehow now was something else entirely. Then lead, he said. Oren led. Getting Drath into the formal diplomatic chamber required the removal of 3 structural support columns and a ceiling panel. The station's engineering team did this in under an hour, which was faster than they had ever done anything, and which said something about the quality of work that becomes possible when the person you are doing it for is waiting directly outside the door. The chamber was normally elegant in the specific way of places designed to make species feel equal while subtly reminding everyone of the hierarchy. Long curved benches, designated seating by member status, a raised central floor for whoever was formally presenting, lighting calibrated for maximum impartiality, which in practice meant it was slightly unflattering to everyone. When Drath entered, the chamber stopped being elegant. It became something else. It became a room that was aware of what was in it. Delegates pressed to the edges of their benches. Some did this because they wanted to look. Some did it because they wanted to be as far from the center as possible. Most did both simultaneously. The representative from the Duvari collective, a species that communicated primarily through bioluminescent skin patterns, was cycling through colors so fast it looked like a malfunctioning light display. Brel, who had been allowed into the observer section due to a bureaucratic oversight that no one wanted to correct, watched from the upper tier with wide eyes and absolutely no intention of missing any of this. Oren walked to the central floor. He did not use the podium because the podium was designed for species of a particular height range, and Drath was watching. And Oren felt that using a podium right now would look like the wrong kind of statement. He stood on the floor and he looked around the room. "I am going to make this simple," he said. His voice was not raised. In the silence of the chamber it did not need to be. "I have been authorized to present evidence to the formal record, not as an accusation, not as a motion. As a record, the conclave archives things. I am going to ask it to archive the truth." He placed the papers on the floor in front of him, the same papers he had carried through the corridors and onto Drath's ship and back again. They looked very small in the big chamber. They looked very real. He went through them. He was careful and unhurried. He cited the Werk Accord by article and section. He cited the budget reallocation records. He cited the census. He did not raise his voice. He did not use large language. He said what happened in the simplest words he had, because simple words are harder to argue with than complicated ones. Complicated language gives people room to move around in. Simple language does not. Around the chamber the delegates were quiet, the kind of quiet that is not peaceful, the kind that is working. When he finished presenting the documents, he said, "I will now ask Drath to address the conclave." He looked across the room to where Drath was settled against the far wall, which was the only place in the chamber that could accommodate him without blocking the exits for everyone else. "There is one thing he wishes to read into the record." Drath moved forward. The room adjusted itself around him in that way it had. Delegates shifting, benches creaking, the atmosphere compressing slightly with the awareness of his presence. He stopped in the center of the room. He took out the tablet, the large old Werk-made tablet that Oren had seen the night before in the ship. He began to read names one by one, the Werk dead, from the first year after the displacement, through every decade since, in order, the way they had died from cold exposure, from sickness, from resource failure, from age in conditions that should not have produced such early age. He read each name in the Werk tongue, which was a language that had not been spoken formally in a conclave chamber in 4 centuries, and which sounded like stone and deep wind and something very old, trying to be precise. He read for a long time. No one interrupted him. No one asked him to stop. No delegate called a point of order, not because they were afraid to, though some of them were, because there is a particular quality to the reading of the names of the dead that makes interruption feel like a thing you will not be able to live with afterward. The Duvari delegate had stopped cycling colors. It had settled into a single deep blue and stayed there. Saul sat in his senior seat and looked at his hands and listened. He did not look up for most of it. It was not that he could not bear to look at Drath. It was that he could not bear to look at Oren, who was standing quietly to the side, the same composed expression on his face, listening to every name, with the same attention he had given to the documents. When Drath finished, the chamber was silent for a long time. Then he set the tablet down and said, "I do not ask for their lives back. I do not ask for time. I ask that this record exist, that the conclave state formally what was done and what it cost." He paused, "And then I ask that the reparations agreed upon 411 years ago be fulfilled, not as charity, as a debt." Saul rose to speak. "The question of reparations is complex," he said. "There are member states with competing budget obligations. There are procedural requirements for any financial commitment of this size. There are timelines to consider." Oren spoke. He did not raise his hand. He did not ask for the floor. He simply spoke, and his voice was calm, and the room listened. "How long should a debt wait before it expires?" The question sat in the chamber like an object. Saul looked at him. That is not the point. I know it's not the point you were making, Oren said. I'm asking a different question. We are a body that adjudicates agreements. We are sitting in a room where an agreement was broken 400 years ago, and the cost of that breaking is on record in this chamber right now, and the question on the floor is whether we have procedural requirements that should delay addressing it. Further, he looked around the room. So I would like an answer to my question. How long should a debt wait before it expires? What is the number? Give me a year, give me a century. Give me any figure at all, and I will accept that we have a real procedural debate. Saul had no answer. No one had an answer. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Oren had not expected it to be. 4 members abstained, 2 voted against. Every other member of the conclave voted to formally acknowledge the violation of the Verk Accord and to enter the full record into the official archive. The reparations framework was voted on separately. It passed by a smaller margin and it was imperfect. The timeline was longer than Oren would have liked, and the amounts were the result of compromise, which meant they were not quite right in the way that all compromises are not quite right, but they were committed, they were signed. They were in the record now, and the record was being watched by 400 systems who had been quietly following the feeds since the night before. After the vote, the chamber slowly emptied. Delegates filed out in ones and twos, some hurrying, some moving with the deliberate slowness of beings who needed time to think and were taking it. Brell left from the observer tier and went immediately to write the longest personal log entry of his life. Saul lingered. He stood near the door for a moment and looked at the center of the chamber where Oren was gathering his papers from the floor, folding them carefully, putting them back in the carry bag with the same attention he gave everything. He wanted to say something. He tried a few things internally and discarded them. He left without speaking, which was, under the circumstances, possibly the most honest choice he had made all week. Drath waited until the chamber was nearly empty. Then he looked at Oren. They will be slow, he said. About the reparations, there will be delays. Probably, Oren agreed. I'll watch the timeline. You will still be watching in 10 years, Drath said. Then I'll watch for 10 years, Oren said. Or whoever comes after me will. We'll write it into the brief. He looked up at the pale eyes. I know it's not enough. I'm not going to tell you it is. No, said Drath, but it is more than 400 years produced. He paused. That is a statement I did not expect to be making. Neither did I, Oren said honestly. When I woke up 2 days ago, I thought this was going to be a routine summit. And now, Drath said. Oren looked around the empty chamber, at the ceiling panel that had been removed to accommodate a guest who had never been expected, at the space where the support columns had been, at the floor where a list of names had been read aloud for the first time in any formal setting in 4 centuries. Now I have a lot of paperwork, he said. Drath made the low grinding sound again, the one that was laughter. It was a very good sound. 3 days after the vote, Vera Station had a different quality to it. Not peaceful exactly, not resolved, but different the way air is different. After a storm has passed, when everything is still damp and slightly altered, and you are not entirely sure yet what was moved and what was left where it was, the delegates who remained moved through the corridors with the self-conscious energy of people who know they have been part of something and are not yet sure how history is going to file it. The illegal feeds had been quietly made official. 432 systems had watched some portion of the last 3 days. The conclave's public communications office had released a statement that was precise and careful, and said very little, which was the office's specialty and which, this time, was not going to be enough. The questions were already coming in from every direction and would keep coming. Oren had a queue of diplomatic messages, 30 pages long. He had not answered any of them yet. He was sitting in one of Vera's stations. Smaller observation bays, a curved room on the outer edge of the station with a wide viewport, and he was watching the stars and drinking something hot from a sealed travel cup, because the gravity fluctuations near this part of the station made open containers unreliable. He looked like a man who had done something large and was now taking a moment to be small and quiet before the world caught up with him. Commander Voss found him there. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then came in and sat on the bench on the opposite side of the viewport. He looked out at the stars too. "You have 17 requests for formal comment," he said. "I know because they came through my security channel somehow, which shouldn't be possible." "I'll answer them," Oren said, "later. 3 of them are from member states who voted against the reparations motion. They want to, and this is the language they used, clarify the procedural record." He paused. "I think they mean they want to make it harder." "They'll try," Oren said. "That's all right. Things on record are harder to undo than things that were never said." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have never been that frightened in 12 years of this posting, and I've been through 2 hull breach events and a species contact incident that I am not cleared to describe." "I know," Oren said. "I was frightened too." "You didn't look it." "Looking frightened didn't seem useful," Oren said. "It usually isn't. When things are frightening is exactly when you most need to look like the next 5 minutes are manageable." He paused, "even if you're not sure they are." Voss considered this. "I've never been more terrified of an unarmed person in my life," he said finally. Oren looked faintly amused. "That is genuinely very kind." Voss shook his head slowly. He stood up and then paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you did the right thing, walking out there." All of it. He seemed like he wanted to say something more and could not find the form for it. He nodded once and left. Oren sat for a while longer. Then he finished his drink and went to find Drath. Drath was at the docking bay, not aboard his ship, standing outside it in the large outer corridor of the bay, looking at the hull of his own vessel, with the expression of someone looking at a thing they know very well and have not looked at simply without purpose for a very long time. The ship was dark and massive, and scarred in ways that had nothing to do with decoration. It had been through a great deal, it showed. Oren stopped nearby and looked at the ship too. "Old," he said, not as a question. "Older than this station," Drath said. "Older than most of the species in that chamber." "Does it have a name?" Drath was quiet for a moment. "In the Verk tongue, it translates poorly." "Try." Another pause, something like the weight of continuing. He turned his head slightly. The Verk believed that survival was not passive, that to keep living after great loss was a deliberate act, an effort. The ship was named for that idea. Oren looked at the ship for a long time. "That is a very good name," he said. The docking bay was quiet around them. Most of the station's traffic had moved to other levels, partly out of courtesy and partly out of the deep end understandable instinct to not linger near something that had burned 2 colony worlds. "There are delegates who want to speak with you before you leave," Oren said. "Formally, several of them voted for the reparations motion. I think some of them are ashamed and are looking for a way to express that which doesn't require them to say it directly." "I am not interested in managing their shame," Drath said. "I didn't think you would be," Oren said. "I told them I would pass it along." "I have passed it along." Something like appreciation moved through Drath's expression. He looked at Orin with those pale, ancient eyes for a moment. He had a way of looking that took its time, the look of something that had lived long enough to know that it is possible to miss things by looking too quickly. "Your species," he said, "how long have you been in space?" "About 260 years, Orin said. 263. Depending on which launch you count as the official start." "You are children," Drath said, not unkindly, as a fact. "We know," Orin said. "Everyone keeps telling us." "And yet," Drath said, he did not finish the sentence. He let it sit there, a thing that did not need a rest. Orin smiled slightly. "And yet," he agreed. Drath turned back to his ship. He moved to the boarding access, which was large enough that it barely needed to open fully to accommodate him. He stopped at the threshold. "I will monitor the reparations timeline," he said. "So will I," Orin said. "I'll send reports if that's useful." "It will be useful." A pause. "I will know if the reports are honest." "They will be." Drath looked back at him one last time. Those eyes held too much in them, too. Name simply, too much time, too many names, too many years of carrying things. That should have been set down long before this, but there was something else in them now, something that had not been there when he walked through these corridors 3 days ago. Small, not happiness, not relief, something quieter and more durable than either of those. "The galaxy is not ready for your species," he said. "I know," said Orin. "You will either save it or break it. I cannot determine which." "Neither can we," Orin said. "That's sort of the ongoing project." Drath made the sound, the low, grinding sound from deep in his chest, like stone finding a new position. It was unmistakably laughter. It moved through the docking bay and into the station's bones, and Brel, who was at his console 3 levels up, felt it through his chair and sat very still and smiled without knowing quite why. Then Drath boarded his ship. The doors closed, the systems ran their cycle, and the great burned iron vessel, the weight of continuing, eased away from the hull of Vera Station and moved into the dark without haste, the way old things move when they are no longer in a hurry. Orin watched through the docking bay viewport until the ship was a point of darker dark against the stars, and then smaller, and then gone. He stood there for another minute, just standing. Then Ambassador Sull appeared at the corridor entrance behind him. His footsteps were deliberate. He stopped a few meters away and stood with his hands behind his back, and he looked at the viewport where the ship had been, and he was quiet for a moment. "I read the Accord," Sull said, "the night it all began for the first time." "I know," Orin said. Sull was quiet again. "I have been senior delegate for 19 years. In those years, the Verk file came across my desk 4 times. I scheduled it for review. Each time," he paused, "I never reviewed it." Orin did not say anything. He waited. "What did you say to it?" Sull asked. "The first time when you walked out there alone." He paused. "What were the first words?" Orin thought about it. "I asked if he was hungry," he said, "and I meant it." Sull looked at him. That was it. He'd been carrying 400 years of being treated like a threat instead of a person, Orin said. "The least I could do was act like he was someone worth asking." He picked up his carry bag from the floor where he had set it down without noticing. That's the thing, he was just worth asking. Sull did not have anything to say to that. He stood there for a moment longer. And then he turned and walked back down the corridor, and Orin listened to his footsteps fade. Outside the viewport, Vera Station drifted in its slow path around the dying red star, same as it always had. The star gave its thin light, the dark gave its patient dark. Somewhere out in that dark, an old ship was carrying the last Verk home, with something new in the record that had not been there before. Not justice, Not yet, not fully, but the shape of it, the beginning of the shape of it, a debt acknowledged, names read aloud, a formal record that could not be quietly reclassified under resolved matters anymore, because 432 systems had watched and would keep watching. It was not enough. Orin knew it was not enough. But he also knew what had been true 3 days ago, when he had picked up his carry bag and walked alone into a corridor that everyone else had decided to walk away from. Nothing until someone does something is anything. He had done something. He straightened his jacket, he picked up his bag, he walked back toward his quarters to begin answering 30 pages of messages, because the work was what came next, and the work was always what came next, and that was all right. That had always been all right.